time. This is Bill Lively calling. Throughout my career. Yeah.
All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. All right, we'll have plenty of time for discussion afterwards. I don't plan on talking for very long, but I want to at least give a little history for those who's new to One Health Academy, what it is. It's been around since 2006. Tom McGinn was the one who started it. And it's kind of a way to informally gather, bring the best minds together for One Health, but mostly talk about, mentoring, networking, just kind of interacting with everybody and sharing a little bit. So with that in mind, I think we can go around and do a quick introduction of everybody real fast. I'm okay with that. I don't care if it eats into my time. So I'm Will Sander, veterinarian with MPH, doing a AAAS fellowship at EPA. Bill, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Bill Lyerly. I'm actually a former AAAS fellow, but I'm retired, recently retired. I spent 42 and a half years in government service, some in the military and some in Health and Human Services, U.S. Agency for International Development, State Department, Department of Homeland Security, and a year at the White House. But other than that, I'm a tri-service officer. I was trying to get all of them.
I'm Charlie Beadling. I'm a classmate of Bill Lyerly's from 40 years ago at the Air Force Academy and have been in the Department of Defense since I was 19 years old. I'm currently working as a physician at the DoD up at the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences in Bethesda and run the Center for Disaster and Humanitarian Assistance.
Center for what?
Humanitarian and Disaster Assistance Medicine. That's too much for me to say. We just say sit-em.
Sit-em.
But that doesn't really
Hi everyone, I'm Kirsten Lyerly. I'm Bill's daughter and I work under Charlie, so I'm a project officer at Syndromic.
Supporting him.
an MPH from Tulane.
We're going to MPH from Tulane. We work for the disaster preparedness program supporting Africa disaster preparedness.
Jeff, I guess.
I'm Jeff Newman. I'm a private practitioner in Northern Virginia. Practices. I'm the past president of the Veterinary Medical Association and trying to medical project in that.
To enable audio control, please enter your audio PIN followed by the pound or hash sign. If you do not have a PIN, just press pound or hash.
Hi, I'm Kathy Simmons. I'm the Chief Veterinarians of the National Cattle Association and from AAAS.
Allie Tyrrell, I'm a senior veterinary student at the University of Georgia, visiting with the AVMA for
Sam.
I'm Sam Sander. I'm a veterinarian at the National Zoo, finishing my residency this year, and then I'll be going to Baltimore Zoo for position. I'm Jacqueline Earl. I'm a private practitioner in Northern Virginia.
James Steele. I'm an associate veterinarian at the National Zoo.
Ken Dobson, graduate from the University of Georgia.
Good on.
And I'm an MD pathologist in the applied epidemiology section at USDA FSIS.
I'm Cynthia Ronzia. I'm a PhD in public health, quasi-researcher, policy.
Karen Becker. I'm at FSIS and Director of Applied Epidemiology and Public Health Science. And I just want to say that Cynthia and I were MPH students. No, you were PhD. I was MPH. She was PhD.
I overlooked it.
Smarter than I was. That's all. At Hopkins many years ago, and thanks.
More than us?
Maybe.
No.
Thanks to her ability to link up with networks and stuff, she was able to track me down and connect again, and I brought her here, and so I'm just really happy to have her here with us tonight.
Karen.
Karen James Preston, recently retired December 2014. I was the National Director, Input Export Animal Products, USDA APHIS Veterinary Services. Always practice, have a little small household practice, that's one thing down. And because I'm retired, I still have a little bit more, I have more time, so I started dealing with the DC board.
Great.
I'm Romina Hennig, and I work for USAID Veterinary Services. I used to work under Karen, when she was working, and work with import of animal products. I'm also in the Army Reserves, and actually just got back from a tour in Africa, which was awesome. And I graduated the same class as James, and I just realized that. That's it.
I'm Dawn Hunter. I'm also a veterinary medical officer in USDA NIES under Karen James Preston.
Matt Doyle. I'm a veterinary medical officer at FDA's Coordinated Outbreak Response and Evaluation Network for foodborne outbreaks. I'm proud to say that I am also a former AAA as well.
Lee?
I can't hear you.
Sorry. My name is Lee Bertha. I work in an educational software company and tag along with Rachel here.
I'm Rachel Cumberbatch, a veterinarian and AAAS fellow. I'm currently posted at the EPA in indoor environment working on asthma. I'm Vicky Hansen, a local engaged veterinarian.
I'm Tanya Nichols, I'm a microbiologist at EPA.
I'm Paula Goldberg. I'm Executive Director of City Wildlife in Washington, D.C. Come from a background in human medicine. I'm a licensed physician assistant, did internal medicine and emergency medicine for many years.
I'm Carol Entire. I'm a veterinary pathologist, wildlife pathologist at the National Wildlife Health Center for 21 years, and recently, 2 years ago, moved to DC, and I'm Assistant Program Coordinator for Environmental Health at USGS.
I'm Kim Walter. I'm a veterinarian microbiologist. I've come to the few terrible trusts, but before that, I was at the Food and Drug Administration for 4 years as an experiment.
I'm Peggy Keller with the DC Department of Health and the Health Preparedness and Response Administration and background in environmental public health.
Teresa Kitugwa. I am a microbiologist. I work at the National Biosurveillance Integration Center in the Department of Homeland Security.
I am her daughter and 2 years away from Athens.
I'm John Poppy, Chief of the U.S. Army Veterinary Corps, and I work release program from the Pentagon.
I'm Tiffany Kimbrell. I'm a Veterinary Corps officer in the Army.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone for introducing yourself. So afterwards, you can all mix and mingle, and maybe you remembered one or two people that you want to talk to. That's the whole point of this. So, quick little more background on me. I was at AAAS doing the EPA fellowship in the Office of Water, looking at pharmaceuticals in water. And they were kind enough to let me step away for a month to do professional development and go on this trip that I'm going to talk to you about today. So last November, I was with Veterinarians Without Borders US. There's Veterinarians Without Borders Canada as well. And they recently received a grant from USAID, Farmer to Farmer, to have they have a 4-year grant to go to both Uganda and Ethiopia several times to help build up surveillance within local farmers, mostly some animal care workers as well. So I was in the first trip for all of the 4-year grant. And I'll try and talk a little about that. So we started with Uganda first because there's a little bit more, Veterinarians Without Borders started with Uganda first because there's a little bit more, USAID presence there, and also a lot more contacts that we had in place already there.
You need to figure out if you have any questions.
So I'll talk a little about background, some of it very simple, some of it a little bit more in depth, what we taught, kind of how we went about what we did, lessons from the districts that we went to during our time we were there. The goals of the program, and then also I'll have some fun pictures that we snuck away a little bit and had, tourist fun. So, so a little bit of background. This whole thing started with African Union, Inter-African Bureau for Animal Resources, wanting to try and build up their surveillance more in sub-Saharan Africa. And they then requested U.S. as one of several people, but one of several organizations, to step in and try and provide funding for this. So USAID is the one who granted the funds to Veterinarians Without Borders to do Uganda and Ethiopia over the next 4 years. The goal is to do 6 trips to each country over those 4 years, and each trip is about a month long. And we're trying to go to 7 to 8 districts in each trip that we go. So cover probably about half the districts in each of these countries when we're done with the 4 years. Obviously, that's not all the districts. So part of what we're doing when we go through there is doing a train-to-trainers sort of thing to have more outreach and to hopefully build upon this to have second and third phases down the road as well. And there are generally about 25 to 30 participants in each of the districts that came. Most of them, as I said, are farmers. Most of them are subsistence farmers, at least in eastern Uganda, where we were at. But a lot of them are leaders in their community. They're either chairmen or they're mayors for their area, so they have some influence and some ability to relate to a bigger group of people that we couldn't necessarily talk to directly. And the whole idea is to strengthen surveillance at the ground level. So obviously there's a lot of other things that go into surveillance that I'll talk about later and that most of you know about. But one of the big things is reporting what's happening on the ground. And so the idea here is with a small amount of investment for doing these trainings, you can actually get a decent return as far as increased reporting, which is the whole goal of this program. And if people have questions, don't hesitate to interrupt or ask. So very basics that most of you already know who are veterinarians. And some of you who aren't veterinarians probably know it too. But so transboundary animal diseases, formerly foreign animal diseases, are diseases that can either spread quickly, are often untreatable, have large economic impacts, or zoonotic. So here's just a sample of some of those transboundary animal diseases. There's obviously a huge list, but this is just a very quick sample here. And to reorient everybody who's not as familiar with Africa, I wanted to put up a map, obligatory map, and show some of the neighbors that are around as well. So Uganda obviously is right here, bordered by Lake Victoria and several other countries. On the west side, we have DRC and Rwanda, and South Sudan, the newest country in Africa, it's the north. And then we have Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, and Tanzania on the east side. And the big thing we try to point out to participants, with East Africa being here, is we have the Saudi Peninsula right here, which is one of the big drivers for meat consumption. And that's where we're hoping, one of the goals of the program is if we can improve surveillance and improve disease security, we can help the economic capabilities in Uganda. They can charge more for their meat as they ship it out to some of these places. And I've always been taught when I go places that you want to know a little bit about what's going on before you go and not just go in blind. So it's always important to have a little bit of cultural context. And I'm sure most of you are aware of that. So Uganda, for those who don't know, before Europeans got there were 3 kingdoms, Buganda, Ankoli, and Buyoro. They're still in existence, and they still have kings in place, actually, right now. They're just ceremonial kings. They don't have any political power, but they are still there. And that really kind of influenced some of the dialects that we came across, even in our small area that we covered. But it's important to kind of realize that was the context before the late 1800s when the British really came into Uganda. Independence occurred in 1962 from the UK, but it didn't come without a cost, as then they had a few dictatorial regimes come through, most famous of which is Idi Amin in the 70s, who killed about 300,000 people during his 9-year brutal reign. His successor came in afterwards, did a little bit better in his 4 years and only killed 100,000 people. But it was a pretty rough 15-year period. So it really didn't help their infrastructure, didn't help. Idi Amin was also very prejudiced against Indians, who the British brought a lot in to help build infrastructure in Uganda. So he drove most of the Indians, from India, Indians out of Uganda. And that really crushed a lot of the infrastructure that was in place. And so it's been a kind of a process over the last 30 years, building that back up. President Museveni came into power through an election, although it was a single-party election in 1986. And he's still in power now. So in the early 2000s, he had the House, the parliamentary House, change the rules to say there isn't a 3-term limit, there's unlimited terms. There has been multiple parties now in Uganda since, I think, the mid-90s. And he's still won all of the elections by a landslide. I think they're 5-year terms. So Museveni posters are plastered all around Uganda. Capital is Kampala, located here in the south. and right on Lake Victoria. And they're also considered the source of the Nile. There's some contention about that, but most people, especially Ugandans, claim the source of the Nile, which starts right here near Jinja, comes on out and goes north. There's some debate about whether it's actually in the foothills of Rwanda or elsewhere, but that's what we're going to stick with for right now. It's one of the most densely populated African countries at 36 million people, and it's a pretty small country, about the size of Oregon. So that's kind of plays a big role too. Where we were in eastern Uganda, it's very densely populated, a lot of subsistence 1 acre or 2 acre farms. Not a lot of people in the city though. I mean, Kampala has probably like 1/5 of the population or 1/6 of the population, but there's a lot still out in the countryside. And the official language is English, but Luganda is also spoken, as well as many other dialects, which came into play when we were doing our courses too. So where we were at, we covered 7 districts: Uganda, Mayuge, Jinja, Bugiri, Namatumba, Lisa, and Kamuli. And so that was out high outline that here. So Mount Elgon, some of you may have heard of this mountain. Disease outbreaks, but also because there's some pretty waterfalls there. The gorillas are down in Windy Park, down in the southwest corner. A lot of chimpanzees are based around the Fort Portal area. And the Nile flows through the area that we were at. So that's where we covered during our month that we were there. It was just in that southeastern corner of Uganda. So what did we teach them? Well, the title of what we taught them was Syndromic Surveillance for Livestock Health. I can tell you most people had no clue what that meant when we showed up. And that's okay. So we wanted first to learn about, in each of the districts, what their animal husbandry practices were. We wanted to get an assessment of what was in place, what they were doing, let them basically teach us the first day of the 2.5-day courses that we were doing. Tell us, what costs were for animals, where they thought animals went. And they have a wealth of experience. A lot of these people have been doing it for generations, and this is their livelihood. They talk to us about what diseases are present, whether it's in their local dialect or actually in English. And then we talked to them about how disease surveillance is done in different countries, kind of doing a developing versus developed country, with US as an example versus Uganda, public good versus private good diseases. And then the big thing we wanted to hammer home was report, report, report. For nothing else, we wanted them to develop a relationship with the district veterinary officer. And the district veterinary officer came to all seven districts. Veterinary officers came for at least part of, if not the whole course. So they actually went around and interacted with all these participants, provided their cell phone numbers. There was a real rapport developed. And then the big thing was we gave them a manual. I think it's always important to bring something so that they have something to hold on to and say, this is a real product that I have. And this manual was developed in a collaboration with Corey Brown, along with several other people. And it was also collaborated with across several African country representatives too, to try and make it as inclusive as possible. It's very picture oriented and not very word oriented. And it's about 100 pages long. It's made of like synthetic plastic, so you can wash it off, get it dirty. It doesn't really tear very easily, so it should last a long time out on farms. And then our last half day, we spent walking through a chicken necropsy to kind of give them an idea of what veterinarians are looking for, what kind of diseases, what kind of changes happen in chicken. It's a lot easier to do chickens than pulling out a goat or a cow. So that was just kind of a nice teaching moment to talk to them about what veterinarians are trying to do and what the goals are behind that. So when we showed up, they always had, self-started, they always had a list of who's going to be the chair of this course, a participant, who's going to be the timekeeper, who's going to be the goodwill ambassador. And we always put up our learning objectives, which were learning about transboundary animal diseases and reporting, learn how to use the manual that we gave to them. Networking was a big thing that we wanted to try and have them talk to everybody in the community. And then sharing the new knowledge outside of the participant group here, which we'll talk a little more about. So this was often the scene during our courses here. We had them break apart a lot into groups, working on whether it was broken out by commodity, whether there was cows or goats or chickens, or broken apart by just counting numbers, and then breaking off into those numbered groups, and really having them work through these things, and then writing it down on these large sheets of paper. We had a generator with us. We thought about doing PowerPoint at one point. We realized that was not going to be worthwhile. So we had them, doing these big poster report type things and writing down what they wanted to teach to the class, and then teaching it to the class, doing a lot of teach back exercises. So this is a sample from the manual. So Newcastle disease, there's a few pages on Newcastle disease, but just kind of gives you an idea of what's included. There's a few different disease names. Unfortunately, nothing in Uganda besides Newcastle. But then these pictures kind of demonstrate for people, again, with a little bit of explanation of, the disease here, fomites, and how many animals die. We have almost all the chickens upside down and dead. Pretty easy conveyance that they're not going to make it through this. So this was kind of a sample of what we had in the manual. And I have it with me if anybody wants to take a look at it. And they were really gracious. The biggest thing I was struck by was the enthusiasm that these people had. They came, they took time out of their work schedules. A lot of them don't have a lot of spare time. They're working all the time on their farms and came. We had Alice here, which is from our first district. She's 64 years old. She's one of the oldest participants we had. The life expectancy in Uganda is about 54. And she got up and did a dance for us with this book because she was so excited to have something and to be taught a little bit more about what's going on. We had them break apart into their, we talked about who did a lot of cows, who did chickens, who did goats. Those were the primary commodities. Some people did all of them, but we had them break apart into either the cow group, this pink section, or goats and green, or yellow is for poultry, and to come up with a list of diseases, slap them up here and tell us which one's public good and private good after we talked to them about what that was. And we even had, occasionally we had some people raising pigs too, so the African swine fever. Okay. So this is kind of a sample list here of what we came up with every time. Sometimes we had to supplement and add a few diseases on that they had forgotten or hadn't thought of. But they always had to write it up in their local dialect as well, too. So that about half the people that were in these courses could understand English great, could speak English pretty well. Half the people really couldn't. So we always, at the start of each course, nominated usually an animal health officer that was present to be our translator, mostly because they have the most education in general, so they were able to translate pretty effectively. And it was coming from them rather than us bringing our own translator in or something like that. So we had them put up these public good diseases as well as private good diseases, which I'm not going to talk about today, but really stressing what those were. And then we had them later on, after we kind of explained the surveillance system between US and Uganda, say, hey, what does the US look like for diseases? And we took down all the diseases that we don't have. A lot of these, like TB and brucellosis, we don't really have either minimally. We have it, but it's, it's much more controlled than in Uganda. And back in fall, we had this taken down as well, but that's not the case anymore. So let me talk about how we set up. This is the triangle of surveillance that we always talk to everyone about. I'm sure some of you are aware of. But we have, our farmers and our animal health officers down here on the ground, and they're the central link to what's going on in the field and reporting up, hopefully, to the district veterinary officer. And from there, the district veterinary officer can report it to the chief veterinary officer, who in Uganda is Dr. Kauta. Also, the public labs, which are a little bit lacking. In Uganda, there's only 2 public labs, and they're not. We went to the national public lab actually as one of our stopovers. It's not the best condition, but it's what they have, and they don't have many private labs at all. So because of that, because of some of the holes, we have this dotted circle. Surveillance isn't a complete circle. It's not a complete intact thing. I mean, emphasize that they fit into this triangle though, influence this, and even, if it's a big enough disease and reportable, goes to OIE or FAO. So it fits into the global context. Many of you are already aware of how this happens. So then again, we would compare it with the US or developed country system, and emphasizing that, we got this way. We used to be like Uganda, 100 years ago, but a lot of things have changed with being able to control diseases. And so we've been able to drive up prices for our meat and commodities, and that's been able to influence having more private veterinarians, private labs help funnel into the surveillance system. But still the same core concepts for the triangle of surveillance. All right, some pictures. So, we get to go around some of the areas a little bit. We did see some pig farms who are just on natural dirt. This is one of our classrooms here where goats were wandering in these open air classrooms. This is right outside one of our classrooms, one of the boreholes where the community came to get their water for the day. Breaking out into sessions here. our food that was prepared so nicely for us by our NGO in Uganda who came with us to all these places. So this is some matoke cooking up under banana leaves. And then, the instant celebrity status that was Kate Varela down here, right outside the outhouse, getting swamped by little kids. So, people were very excited about what was going on. Here's Corey Brown, going over the triangle of surveillance. The cattle in some of the more metropolitan areas just eating on garbage. This is our chef from the nonprofit who came with us everywhere. And Coley cattle wandering through, and this is one of our classrooms here on the bottom left. And then Kate up top holding a baby kid and a kid underneath the baby. I don't know if you guys can see that. Go kid right there. So people were very warm and welcoming, which really helped facilitate this too. I think it would have been much more of a challenge had that not been the case. So chicken necropsies. These were done on the last day, and if any of you have been to Uganda, you may have known that there, in a lot of sub-Saharan Africa, it can be like this too, but they're very pomp and circumstance about opening and closing ceremonies to things that Ugandans, I've never met so many people who can to stand up and give an oration for an hour and a half. It's amazing. But so at closing ceremonies, they all showed up dressed up nicely, in their nice suits or dresses. And then we said, we're going to do chicken necropsies. And they didn't care. They jumped right in. So, a lot of these people, slaughter the chickens on their farm normally anyway. So we always had one of the traders that was in the group or one of the farmers bring in 3 chickens that we tried to say, we're going to do scraggliest, sickest looking chickens. We want to see something. We divided up into 3 groups and kind of had each one of us, U.S. participants there to guide them through a necropsy. Had them each pass around the scalpel and cut out an organ system, and go through that process and show them what was, and lay out the organs here on the table, wrap them up in, zip bag sort of thing, and prepare it like you were going to write a necropsy report and send it off to the lab. And of course, nothing is to be wasted, so we picked up the chicken afterwards and ate it as a snack after closing ceremony. So, most exciting part was the last day of necropsies. One of the chickens actually had Newcastle. So, we were in districts that we knew had some Newcastle outbreaks. Certainly people talked about it all the time. And we also in districts where we didn't see this, but they had FMD quarantines going on in their district. So, but this bird actually had, the swollen spleen that was a little bit modeled, and show up great in this picture. The changes in the proventriculus here, petechia under the eyelid. So the participants were thrilled about this though, because the DVO, the district veterinary officer, was there that day. So they wrote the necropsy report, they put all the samples in the bag the way they're supposed to, handed it to the district vet officer and said, hey, there you go. And so it was a great learning moment for them, kind of connecting the dots. The other fun thing about Newcastle that we learned, we had to dispel a myth, is that people thought that if you ate a bird that had Newcastle and then walked by a farm and farted, you spread Newcastle to those birds, which is it was hard to keep a straight face when they told this story. So then there's some pictures from the countryside. A lot of you have seen this if you've traveled to Africa or elsewhere. But motorcycles being used to carry 60 empty water jugs. We have Ankole cattle that's being herded through by our school building. Goats being transported on the back of bicycles in a basket. Really pretty school uniforms. Each of the schools we passed had a different color, matching uniform going on, and kids. School is free. They're not the best schools, but it is free through secondary school in Uganda. And there's some other great shots. Kids right outside of our classroom, around the calf. In our area, there was a lot of sugarcane plantations as well, too. So there were a couple big factories that were processing it. And we actually saw lines that were miles upon miles of trucks lined up from their own private farms with sugarcane ready to try and process it. We passed by a water collection system here. Drains down the roof and collects in this little aquifer reservoir underneath. And then on the even years in December, near Mbale, they actually had to do ritual circumcisions of boys between 13 and 20. So this is one of the participants, and we were right by Mbale in December. So and they walked them for about 2 to 3 days around all the area and celebrate, drink lots, basically make this guy as exhausted and as drunk as possible, and then stand him in front of a crowd of his peers, do the circumcision, and if he flinches, he's not considered a man. But if he passes through that, then they huddle him off to a hut and recovers for several days after that. But it was amazing. They had throngs of like 150 people with this guy and rallying around and chanting. So it was kind of the craziest and scariest parade I've seen in a while. So some of the fun pictures. So Kate and I were able to sneak away one weekend and go raft the source of the Nile by Jinja, class 4 to 6 rapids. There's a Nile monitor lizard here, which are about 4 feet long. So some pretty amazing rafting. And then we had covered at times for Chris Young and Corey Brown, who were also on this trip, for various sessions, because the Uganda Vet Association actually met while we were there. So they went off and presented about what was going on with Vets Without Borders. We covered for them then. So they covered for us for one of the districts, and we went up to Murchison Falls in northwest Uganda. These are falls along the Nile River. And then some great safari stuff afterwards, right in that area too, with giraffe and hippos, crocodiles. This is we stayed with the hostel group, little tiny campground here. This is the view. It's very nice. So getting back to the meat of this, so the statistics from the field, I just want to give you an idea. There are about 28 participants per course. We had, 155 to 39 ratio of male to females, which isn't great. It's better than we expected. But considering the amount of women that actually do the farming in these areas and are with the animals most of the time, it wasn't as good as we'd like it to be. The average family size is about 8, which isn't atypical in Uganda. They have a pretty high, pretty big family group size compared to a lot of sub-Saharan Africa. And then we got these average prices about chicken and goats and cows. And they really vary based on a lot of times local breeds versus exotic breeds and whether there are crosses, that sort of thing. But it gave us a perspective of what kind of damage would happen if, one of the farmers only has 1 cow, maybe 2 goats, and loses, then the FMD or something, or, where they're taken away by the government, or, just trying to give a perspective of what's going on. So some of the basic takeaways was just you learn as much, and sure all of you experience this, if not more, than what you get from them. I found Uganda very friendly, lush, beautiful, very open and enthusiastic. This is Kate teaching us Mary Mac to some kids. You did that when you were a kid. And then working at the local level actually obviously can have huge national and even international impacts, and it's important to remember that. So, final slide, moving forward. The second trip to Uganda just finished 2 weeks ago. Kate Varela was leading that, along with 2 other folks who went. Trips to Ethiopia start this fall. Each trip brings 3 to 4, either U.S. vets or vet students, obviously with a mixture of experiences, so they can have someone leading and someone kind of learning more about the ropes. And then each workshop participants, they're assigned at the end of it to talk to at least 25 other community members about what they learned. And we went through this as like a role-playing session of like 3 minutes with your neighbor. What did you learn from this? What are you going to tell them about this? And then the follow-up's being done by MTCEA, which is the NGO we worked with throughout this. So they're the ones who actually set up who was coming to these sessions. They're the ones who set up what districts we were going to. They're the ones who know what's going on the ground. They're Ugandan. And they're the ones doing a lot of the follow-up. So they set up little groups of 5 people out of the group of 28 to be the chair for the district and kind of report back what's going on. And the biggest outcome indicator will be increased reporting to the DBO over the 4 years. And the hope is that if that does increase, if that, a lot of other indicators are positive, they're going to try and roll out a phase 2, which will be more veterinary focused for veterinarians in Uganda, talking about better necropsy techniques, talking about how to report things and coordinate things a bit better too. So with that, I'll take any questions. Yeah.
Question. Start off saying, forgive me because I don't have any veterinary background.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the program aspect, I know that you're reporting, but just background wise, did you have any sort of like analysis type of thing? Like I know you were kind of comparing their labs and US labs and things like that. Is there any type of analysis / development for advancing?
So there are some plans in place that aren't related to ours. That there's been a lot of investment actually by Japan as well as US into the national labs to try and get those off on a better foot. They actually have technically a BS L3 level lab within their labs. It's not set up very well yet, but they have all this investment coming in. That's also the human capacity or the training to necessarily handle it very well. So, but there is work going on in that. USAID has done a lot of work in Uganda, but our specific task was not to do any of that. Since other groups are already working and looking at that. Yeah. Yep. Sure.
Since they weren't veterinarians, they were more so the farmers, and they're the ones who take care of it. Did you talk about, I didn't hear anything about biosecurity measures? I assumed you did.
We did. Yeah. So we did spend some time on biosecurity with one of the things we talked to them about. And on the second page of the book, which I can pull out at some point, it actually talks about that too. Yeah. And so really talking about, I can't remember the acronym now off the top of my head, but we use an acronym to kind of talk about, what steps should be done and how you should enforce that. So
did you even, again, since they weren't veterinarians, but they've been around for a while, did you ever talk to them about, I wouldn't say differential diagnosis, but symptoms and signs of what they could, be? And I also noticed that with the swine, you had after the swine fever, but but you didn't, and you talked about foot and mouth disease for the bovine species, but you didn't talk about foot and mouth disease in the swine species, or did you?
We did. So in that sample there, we didn't have it labeled just because, it starts replicating itself, but we did talk about that. We did talk a lot about signs and symptoms. One of the big things they wanted to get out of us was how to treat these diseases, and we kept having to reinforce a lot of these transboundary animal diseases you need to report because a lot of them you can't treat, for one, and two, they need to be reported. So, we talked a lot about, the whole point was it's syndromic surveillance, so it's really talking about signs and symptoms.
Did you talk about disposal, carcass disposal, or anything like that?
We didn't, no, because we didn't want to try and go down that slippery path of them taking care of it on their own. A lot of them did talk about trying to just slaughter them, and have slaughtered them in the past, if they look sick, even if they show some of these signs and symptoms. So that's one of the biggest hurdles, was trying to, and that's why it was important that the vet officer was there. And actually, most of them did take a pretty big lead in the facilitation. They would step up and interject, and we wanted them to try and develop that relationship so that there can be a trust and that they can actually report instead of just slaughtering it and eating it, because it's certainly a big loss.
One last thing on the foot and mouth disease, basically there are a lot of particular diseases they have that are not as dire as foot and mouth disease. Right. Did you talk to them about that, and when you send in the samples, which are the main samples you need to send in, and the times and all that?
So we didn't talk about much. We did talk about the fact of what signs we're looking for in foot and mouth, which can oftentimes look a lot like a lot of other vesicular diseases. Right. So in that case, we said that's when you call. That's when you need to call the local vet you work with, your private vet if you have one, or the district vet officer. They're the ones who clarify. They're not veterinarians; they're farmers. And so we didn't go down that road of disposal or sending in samples per se. We just pulled in the chicken necropsy to give them a taste of what we would do, of what kind of happens and what veterinarians are looking at. But we weren't trying to say you guys should be doing this. We stress explicitly you guys should not be doing chicken necropsies. We wanted them to have some sort of connection with the disease process and organ systems, which they don't necessarily, haven't been exposed to or understand as well with what's going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about some of the ones that I have out there in the bush that can't really get the veterinarian can't get out there or whatever, and they need to get the sample. I guess they say talk to a veterinarian, and the veterinarian will explain to them what they need.
Yeah, one of the things that was a good idea, funding-wise, can't make happen, was talking about getting cell phones that have cameras too, so they can take a picture and text that to their district vet officer or whatever. Because it is hard sometimes, even in these districts, which aren't as huge as some of the other ones in Uganda. It gets tough to get out there and assess everything. So there's a lot of, as you said, there's a lot of gaps that go into surveillance. There's a lot of components that go into it, and this is just one component of it. Obviously, there needs to be better trained district veterinary officers, more of them, more of private vets, better labs. There's a lot of issues. Yeah, Bill.
Well, I was going to ask whether Uganda farmers really wear cowboy hats. But I decided not to. Given the importance of zoonotic disease transmitted into humans.
Yep.
And in the spirit of the One Health concept, did you all coordinate this at all with the district medical officers or any of the medical infrastructure? Because there's a lot of work been done in Uganda for medical surveillance or public health surveillance from the Ministry of Health perspective.
Right.
But you talk about networking, et cetera. Did you make any of those connections?
No, it was something we talked about. It was something we talked about. The way they have it siloed, though, with the Ministry of Agriculture being in charge of this. And yes, and Dr. Kauta, like that wasn't something that was going to be broached this time around. We did have a specific session about zoonotic disease, specifically focusing on brucella and rabies, and talking about those.
Trips, they have a lot of trypanosomes.
They have a lot of trypanosomes too. But at least brucella and rabies, they could do a lot more to intervene there. And so we did talk about that at least, but we didn't have any medical officers there, unfortunately.
So what would you say, or did you get anything from them about what their biggest challenges as animal healthcare workers out there? Like, is it transportation, access to medicine, money, or interest from the government?
For the animal healthcare workers themselves rather than the farmers?
Well, for both of them, I guess.
Yeah.
If there's anything in common.
I mean, I think the biggest thing is probably finances. For the animal healthcare workers, it's like being reimbursed, being paid by the farmer, which a lot of them are bartering their animals and not necessarily getting hard currency. And also being paid, retroactively from the government if they do submit samples or something like that too, for the animal healthcare workers. For the farmers, I think one of the biggest hurdles from a money standpoint is the concern about what's going to happen if they do call and then they come out and, sacrifice those animals and take them. Is the government actually going to pay them out? And that's still a point of contention in the Uganda Ministry of Agriculture as well. So I think those are the biggest hurdles that we came across from people. Yeah, sure, Karen.
Since he may be a graduate, touching bases was whenever you go in another country and you touch bases with the ministries of agriculture, etc. But what about the other government agencies that are in country, like APHIS has Veterinarians International Services, have people stationed in, and they might be maybe in Zaire, but they travel around, and if they know when you're going to be there, they can be there too. Did you touch bases with them at all?
I didn't personally but I'm not sure what was done as far as, so Tom Graham and Corey Brown are kind of the leaders of Vets Without Borders, and they put a lot of the groundwork in place beforehand. While we were in country, fortuitous Uganda Vet Association meeting was there. They got to meet a lot of in-country Ugandan leaders. We touched base with Heifer International. We touched base with the USAID representative there, but we didn't do anything specifically with other U.S. government agencies while we were there that I'm aware of.
I mean, it seems like Corey was a piece of work for us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure some of that groundwork was done. So I know they spent, almost a month there prior to all this, laying a lot of the groundwork, along with a lot of our communication before that. I'm just not as privy to that knowledge, I guess. So. Yeah, Tanya?
I was just going to ask, I realized that this is about syndromic surveillance. And we don't necessarily do syndromic surveillance, but we do water surveillance. Is there a role, or has there been a role looking at water as being part of the surveillance methods?
So it hasn't been broached with this as far as looking at diseases, you mean, with water surveillance? It hasn't been touched much not with this program in particular. I'm not sure about if there's other research going on.
The transboundary diseases are not necessarily water related, but
right.
Part of the process.
Right. And certainly some of the private good diseases do relate, some of the parasites and things like that. But yeah, I don't know about what's going on as far as water surveillance goes. I do agree that, the biggest issue, right, for water here is a lot of it's groundwater too, especially where we were at. Boreholes that's where they're getting most of their water. So, trying to, just like groundwater here in the U.S., it's really hard to get surveillance data on what's going on there. So, yeah.
You noted at the end that for you a measure of effectiveness would be an increase in the reporting of animal diseases to the district health officer and other professionals. Is there any system in place to monitor that, or is there part of this program that will go back in 6 months or 2 years and see whether there's been a change in that particular metric?
There is, yeah. So there's follow-up put in place with monitoring for that, and the district vet office that we worked with in each of these districts, along with subsequent districts that we're going to, are all on board for supporting this, and so they're looking to try and they want to have more reports. They're okay with the extra task load and workload and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know if that's how it's going to pan out. Certainly things change sometimes, but that's the idea. So the real idea is after 4 years, probably at the 2-year mark too, as you mentioned, they're going to be looking at what's going on and if there's a trend moving forward.
Does the program include having somebody actually go there to check their reporting records and stuff?
It does. So yeah. So, and that'll probably be at the 4-year mark though. But yeah, Rachel.
What was their opinion of the veterinary officers? And then you also touched on a little bit that the payout for these animals as they came into DPOP is kind of a contentious point. What was their response to the idea of reporting?
So the relationship, it depended on the district where we're at. As far as the relationship between farmers and the district vet officers, is that what you're getting? The question?
Yeah. Are they respected? Are they feared? You know, is this a government worker? That's a little bit of a man in a suit.
Yeah, so I'd say about 4 of the 7 were well respected, well received, and we could see why just in our small time interaction with them. Like they were good at leading, they were one with the community, they really interacted well. Certainly, just like in any government system, there's some who aren't as great as well. But I think it was important that they were all there at least, because a lot of people didn't even know who the district vet officer was, which makes sense. I mean, why would you know necessarily? Most of the U.S. vets, for example, don't know who their area veterinary officer is. So it was important for that relationship to develop. I think there's still some contention. As far as the payout, we didn't have a great answer for them. The district vet officers also didn't have a great answer for it, which I think is probably one of the biggest hurdles to get over. It's more trying to stress the economic importance down the road. It doesn't help when you're doing subsistence farming sometimes, then the payout's right there, that you don't want to sacrifice this animal in order to have a long-term benefit. So I think that's one of the biggest struggles. Yeah.
Was there any one particular disease that maybe caused most concern for them or that they saw most often over there?
Trips was a big one. Trypanosomiasis was a big one. Brucella was quite common as well. FMD, they actually had a pretty good, at least the animal health officers, not district vet officers, but animal health officers had a good idea how FMD worked and how that came in and the vaccine was developed and brought in to try and contain and quarantine. I think those are the biggest concerns. Newcastle is a big one too. They hadn't seen or didn't even know about avian flu, not real well anyway. I'm sure it's happened, but they don't necessarily know about it. But velogenic Newcastle is certainly a big concern for them. I'd say poultry and goats were the biggest commodities, which makes sense. That you guys probably already knew that, but yeah.
What number of veterinarians actually are there in Uganda, and what's the status? Is there a vet school there?
Yeah, there's actually one. It's the best vet school in Eastern Africa. Well, probably in Eastern Africa at least. So Makerere University is the vet school, and that's in Kampala. Yeah, I was thinking it might be in Entebbe, but it's in Kampala. So it actually draws people from all around East Africa to come there rather than some of the other vet schools in East Africa. So I don't know the exact number of veterinarians though. Most of them are public veterinarians rather than private vets. There are some private vets, but certainly the vast majority of them are public vets. There's certainly a vet. There's about 112 districts in Uganda, and each of them has a veterinary officer for sure. And there's several other smaller vets that we came across. They're both private and public. So I don't know the exact number though. If I had to guess, it'd probably be 1,000 to 2,000 would be my guess, but I don't know. That might be high. Other questions?
So 112 districts in an area that's the size of Oregon.
Yep.
And each one, does it have its own government?
It does. It does have its own governance, but it does fluctuate a little bit. So some aren't as stable or as strong. So sometimes it'll vary between 90 and 112. Still 90 districts in the size of Oregon is a pretty high number. But yeah, they do all have their own governance. And a lot of it has to do with, the fact of how spread out and rural everybody is. And also, transportation is certainly a big issue there too, as it is a lot of developing countries.
It just seemed like coordination would be more difficult.
Yeah, and I think it probably is. I mean, I think coordination is certainly more difficult. But I mean, the advantage, obviously most developing countries have skipped the landline stage and have cell phones, but there's still a lot of coordination issues that come up, and trying to make sure everyone's on the same page is tough. Yeah.
Well, just a question and a comment. One question was there any concern about bats in terms of transmitting diseases? I know Mount Elgon. When I was in Nairobi, that's Mount Elgon is where the Marburg epidemic started.
Right.
While I was there, the statement is or comment is that they used to have the East African community. It was very well networked, etc. Once politically that went away, there's no longer a quote East African community. But a lot of that networking, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda continues. And the first year that I was in the Army lab in Nairobi, I actually sat out at the veterinary research labs. And about 5 miles away is ILRAD, International Laboratory for Research in Animal Diseases. It seems to me that creating a relationship with those organizations and with other, even though your focus was Uganda, and given the transboundary nature of some of the zoonoses, you might be interested in at least establishing a relationship with those organizations.
Yeah, and again, I don't know if Corey and Tom have done any of that. They may have. As far as the bats go, I think it's a good comment though. But as far as the bats go, there wasn't much a concern. It wasn't brought up by anybody anyway, and we certainly didn't talk about it. But it's a good point. Thanks. Yeah. Other questions? Okay.
I still like a cowboy hat.